Thanks to everybody for coming. We've got a pretty full house here. That's really nice. Thanks to my three co-panelists for being here today. I'm Saelan. This is Eli and Danica and Marx.
Hello.
I guess we'll just get started. So I guess my first question is, each of you has run a space in the past and has recently, or semi-recently, or on the verge of opening a new one. Interestingly enough, all of you guys, your first spaces were in garages, or some kind of outbuilding of some kind. And Danica's new space is in Marx's old garage. But so having gone through the experience of running a sort of project space, you've all decided to do it again. So I'm curious to hear about the new spaces that you're opening. You've done in the context of a pandemic. So I'm curious about, for each of you, what are the challenges that you faced in this transition? Actually, I should also specify, Marx had a space here. It closed down, and you opened a new space in Toronto, and now you're about to open a new space here again. And so for you, it's kind of, you're moving it. It's the same space, effectively. But for Eli and Danica, you've each started a new space with a new name. Challenges, and also, after you talk about the challenges that you faced in doing this, you can talk a bit about what motivated you to keep going and to start again. Sorry, big question.
Three.
Who wants to go first?
Go ahead.
So let's see. We moved to Toronto in 2020. So it was I was building the space in Toronto when the pandemic happened. And so it was kind of halfway done. We wanted to open in March 2020. So I had more time, to make it nicer for Danica. So now you have it. So the challenges really were that, the currency for a lot of what we call alternative spaces, which is something we should talk about. I don't know how good that is for these spaces, but is that the currency is people coming and really engaging with the work and with ourselves and in conversation. So that wasn't there. That was a big challenge. We opened late in the year, probably the summer, when it looked better. And we had to have people over through appointments, and that was nice because people really took the time. And I guess once that you book it, you cannot back down, because I was come, please come, But it was just one person in the space every 20 minutes or so, 30 minutes. So it was a lot slower in terms of building the community, which is what these spaces usually also do. It was a new city for us as well, so that was also another challenge. But the community responded really well, which I think for us really showed that there was a lot of need and hunger for that kind of spaces that are, offering a little bit of a different view to art viewing. So just to mention a few, and I'll let my colleagues too. Mm-hmm.
After Calaboose closed in Montreal, it was in 2019, towards the end of the summer, around this time of year. My partner and I moved to Amsterdam, and then shortly after we moved back to Canada for the pandemic. And after Calaboose had been closed for about a year, I personally started to feel like I really missed it, and the process of having exhibitions, and it was really a terrible time seeing so many different spaces that I loved have to stumble through a bunch of these challenges. So after moving about to 3 different cities through the pandemic, I landed back in Toronto, and a very good opportunity came my way. And of course, hearing Marx talk about the challenges that he faced, I was really well set up. It was a gift to have the space that you left, and also to be welcomed by the community that you started to build. And you're very well missed, and it's been great to interact with people in Toronto so far. For me, Joy's just opened in May of this year, so a challenge that I've also had is doing it myself this time. Before it was a project with another co-director, so it's just doing everything, more or less.
Yeah, I think that my situation is similar to yours that way, that I was working collaboratively before and now doing it separately. So that's actually something I'd like to chat with you about, I think. But in terms of the challenges, I think that they're really, I'm getting used to this, but so yeah, the challenges I think are actually kind of starting now in a sense that the pandemic context is over. So just briefly, I had this space called Vidange that was in an old auto body garage in Mile X, I guess, from 2015 to 19. It was this really kind of happenstance situation where we thought that we would have it for just like a couple months. But it was owned by a real estate developer that couldn't sell it, and he said it was good karma to leave it with us. And he never came by, and he was whatever. It was interesting. So we just kind of like could never actually plan because we never knew how long we'd have it. That went on for like almost 5 years, and it really kind of was the energy in a sense. Then in 2019. Two things happened at the same time, which were perfect timing to get out. One is that we were getting kicked out because the building was being sold to Microsoft, and they built a large headquarters right next to the garage. It was not being sold to Microsoft. Tech came into Mile X, and I'm trying to remember, this is like, that whole context has changed so much, but they were coming in, and a tech company was going to buy the building, and they have. So we had to leave. We programmed around that as well. And made a response. We rebuilt this work from the 80s with an artist about, it's a condo. We made it out of blocks, and we left it in the building and left, right? But at the same time, I was also going to graduate school. So trying to like get like more institutional training and stuff like this, 'cause I'm kind of like self-taught curator, figuring out what that means. And COVID happened in March of 2020. I was living in Toronto for graduate school, so I came home to Montreal, and leave me here for that long, and I'm gonna go back to what I do. And I think I went to school and just kind of did a U-turn. I realized, oh, the way I work is fine, and so yeah. But now so the gallery really is much different spatially. It's not in a garage. It's like in a small storefront space on Avenue du Parc, where I spent many years living in Mile End, so it's kind of a part of what I do. And it's so small that I do solo exhibitions, one after another, and I've done about 10 of those. And it's kind of was conceived as a place where people could see art one at a time, and this like small, like kind of, and in person. If we remember how the virtual craze of like online programming stuff, I was like, okay, well, if I just hang out in the basement in this place and like don't come out and talk to people when we're wearing masks, can they come see like one work at a time? And so that kind of small focus still lives on with the space, but now I have more and more people coming in, and yeah, so like the pandemic really informed like how do we start a gallery now? So we'll see what happens.
So the challenge is that you feel like you're kind of outgrowing the space that you have.
Perhaps it's more, yeah, I don't know, like, no, I mean, I'm really growing into it too. Like,
Right.
It's nice. All the things that I wanted to happen are starting to happen. And coming here has been amazing because I've met like over 100 people that live within, 500 meters or a kilometer of the gallery, right? So now they're like, oh, you're right there. I didn't know you were there. Of course not, So now they're coming in, and yeah, if they all come. I don't know what will happen. That's the thing. Yeah.
It's interesting to hear you say that you went to grad school and then you came back and you felt like the way you were doing things was okay. Because Danica also, you left Calaboose and went to school and then came back and opened a new space. Mm-hmm. How do you feel that your further study has affected your approach to curation?
That's a good question. I also sort of feel that the way I was doing things was okay, but it's kind of now filtered through a different layer of experience. Part of my program, I actually ended up working for an institution for a year. Mm-hmm. So that was pretty eye-opening to be kind of on a way larger scale than I'd ever known, working from a garage, things like insurance and, shipping and lots of other elements of, the larger market and world kind of came into focus. And with Joy's just being new, I'm sort of filtering through those lessons now and thinking of the first 6 months of the program as a way to explore those things. Of course, Joy's doesn't have a collection or an institution or anything like that by any stretch of the imagination at the moment, but it's been a nice way to also think through the differences between these different kinds of institutions and also commercial galleries, nonprofits. It's like these definitions of how things operate are in a different focus for me now.
Yeah, totally. I mean, after having done, a program in curating, the obvious options are like you can try to find work in an institutional environment, or you can go into the commercial world. But both of you opted to keep doing what you were already doing, which was something independent. And so I'm curious about what you see those differences are, and like what sort of motivated your choice to. I mean, on the one hand, I think it just shows your commitment to working independently, period. But I'm curious about what you see as the advantages or disadvantages of staying on that path.
Still finding that out, I guess. I don't know. I mean, I have to say that, I think we all probably feel this in any field that we're in, and many people here in the art field, so you definitely know what I'm talking about, but there's also this pressure that if you stop, then, it's over, in a sense. So there was a sort of, to rise to that challenge was a part of it. It's strange. I'm doing like next week, and 2 weeks from now, I have my first show at an artist-run center that I'm curating at the same time. So another challenge right now is also is to do with like sort of the identification of the activities that I do. I want it to remain discursive, right? So how did I do that at an art fair or whatever? But I got invited to this artist-run center show 3 years ago. And so it's really funny that that's happening at the same time as doing the fair. It's completely different spaces or lanes. So, yeah, I don't really have much experience. I don't know. I mean, I don't really have much experience like working any other way, in a sense. So, I don't know. I'd like to think I'd be good at working for other people too, but this has just been like the way to do it. Yeah.
Yeah, that resonates too, I think. It's been one thing I missed a lot when I was working at a larger institution was just the direct conversation and the amount you can really collaborate and work with an artist, the scale of that, the sense of ownership you feel when you work on a space yourself or with others in your community. I think that it's not absent from a larger institution, but it is professionalized, and there's like just a different audience as well to consider. One thing that I'm really excited about for the Joys program is that it's also focused around like my writing practice. So it's a nice way to also satisfy the impulse that I have to write around works and around exhibitions in a way that is unedited at the moment. But maybe I'll look into finding editors if it gets a little too long. But yeah, it's been nice to return to that and revisit that, and also kind of take it on even further by doing it just myself. It's been a good challenge. Yeah.
I've been just waiting for them to finish their degrees, and then I wanna, get them to write for me or something. No, I guess I can add to that. I guess it's for TAB. So we started in 2018 here in Montreal. Did it for a couple of years. Went to Toronto. So I guess for me, not really coming from the background of the arts, it's always been an opportunity to learn through practice, and not only like the, learning about how to put on a show, how to write about it, all of those things, yes, but mostly where the project is going. Like really learn that through doing, and I think for a long time from the beginning of the project, people were always curious to see, or to know what do you want with it? Like, are you, moving towards commercial? Are you moving towards an artist-run center or like some sort of non-for-profit? And it's always been the same answer. It's just like, it's moving somewhere. Let's just wait and see. And so, like, I think things like this here. Now we're just changing topics now. I just changed it.
No, that's great. This actually leads right into what I wanted to talk about, so carry on.
So things like this is kind of like an indication of where this is going, and formalizing relationships, thinking about how else we can support artists. At the beginning was mostly really started as a, as a person from outside of the arts, just looking at the galleries in the city and questioning like who chooses who to show, right? Like who chooses, like that was one of the questions. And then somebody said like, well, somebody does.
Yes.
And then I was like, my artist friends, and I was like, why don't we do it? So that was kind of like how it started. Very naive, but we went to a next thing, and so now we're at the point where we want to really support careers of artists in the long term. So yeah, that's kind of how we make it here, I guess. Mm-hmm.
So for Marx, you and Eli both, and I think this question is going to apply to Danica too, but you've both moved into, or you're in the process of moving into more permanent spaces. You've shown at some art fairs. You're representing artists now. And so I wonder to what extent you still think of to what extent you ever thought of your space as a project space or a do-it-yourself alternative space, and sort of what those labels mean to you, and whether you think those labels are actually helpful or useful. And I think Danica can speak to that as well.
Like right now?
Well, whoever wants to go first, really.
Sorry,
yeah.
I thought you were deferring.
No, I'm okay. I think for me personally, I just think of it as the space that I'm working within. So it's always been a bit funny with Calaboose as well. We're always kind of asked this question, like, what's the end goal? What's the direction? And moving in a direction is, kind of a nice way to put it. Just we're not so focused on the destination, but how you get there and what you're up against in the moment. I think that normally is enough to kind of occupy your attention and your focus, and thinking through the themes of your program is kind of where I more lead. But I do definitely feel a lot of external pressure to kind of define the space. It's definitely a question that comes up all the time. It also, to come up with your financial program, it's helpful to either incorporate as a nonprofit or a for-profit. It's definitely a question that I'm still thinking through all the time.
When you're in the middle, like when you're independent, it's when you have the least support.
Yeah.
Right? So like if you become something, then you get access to potential grants, or like either a commercial space like a gallery, or a non-for-profit or an artist-run center, and then you can access support. So yeah, it's a difficult place to be, and I think if I would have to do it again, I probably would do it faster. I would make a decision a little bit faster, not like 4 or 5 years into it.
Yeah.
That really resonates with me, because I think one thing that was huge was the starting over context was just how much stuff we had done in 5 years, what we'd built. It really felt like how many people I'd meet and be like, oh, I didn't know you were doing something new again, or people I know from before that like don't come now or something. I mean, the pandemic was different, or contacts I had that just didn't kind of carry over, right? For whatever reason. So yeah, starting something new has like been a shift in a sense. But I think the project space word, or alternative space, like these are interesting terms to maybe like, obviously, I don't know, look at historically. I think like even project space in France means something different than it does here. And this ambiguity can also be like really an advantageous position to be in, I think, that you can kind of do many things at once. But eventually that decision will get kind of made for you, or you will make that decision. I mean, even depending how we do here this weekend, like what I do is actively changing. And I think it's interesting that you're mentioning that when you're, or you as well, like kind of how we're registered as businesses and all these decisions, like these are administrative structures we're building. So like there are institutions, even if they're one person, like there's something in society, right? So this is kind of how the individual, I think this is the curator too, right? This the rise of this kind of, I've always thought the curator is like something to do with like management in a sense, like as related to like other parts of the economy or yeah. So I try to like, so the project space term, sometimes I can kind of feel like it's patronizing or something. So sometimes I have to assert that like, no, this is a gallery or, you know, it's an exhibition space. So, but I thought I would end up doing a bit more experimental work than I've done so far, but it's been hard. But I really conceived the place as an office, and it used to be an office space. It's because in a given day, there's multiple things that I do. Like sometimes there's like accounting to do. Sometimes we're building something, so it's like closer to architecture. Sometimes I'm like a psychologist, you know. So it's just like, there's like, I think like I'm trying to understand running a gallery as a practice, like the practice of being a gallerist, I guess. So, but yeah, these words, like they eventually, you have to pick one, I guess. So we're there, yeah, yeah.
Danica, you look like you might want to follow up on that? No? Okay. So that actually really leads really nicely into my next question, which was, does an alternative, a DIY, a project space, I mean, whatever you call it, I think there's always been historically like room for the kind of exhibition space that isn't necessarily one thing. And they've, you know, taken different forms at different times, but there's a very long history of that. But does it always have to become something else? Like, it kind of seems like it does in a way. Like, eventually time and external pressures will force you to institutionalize into a public space, or to just, you know, to grow into a commercial space if that's what you're open to. But time itself will force you to become established as something in a way. Do you guys see any sort of, is that inevitable?
Yeah, I think so. I really think so, because I mean, you can easily make a decision that you will forever be an independent art space. But I think, you know, I think the pressure comes from within. I think the pressure really comes from, okay, so I've done this now. We have had a number of shows or whatever. What else can we do for the artists? What else can we do for the community? You know, I think it's very enticing, the project space, because you are free to do whatever the hell you want in the space, right? But also there's limitations, unless, I guess, that doesn't exist for certain people, I guess. Like, you know, if you are independently wealthy, you can do whatever you want, right? But if you are trying to also support artists in a way that is more meaningful and for the long term, I think, you know, you're, I don't want to say forced, but you are, I guess, you see the other opportunity to support their careers in a way that either a commercial space or a artist-run center can do, potentially more on an institutional side, or in the commercial side, a commercial gallery. And yeah, so I do believe that for me, these projects are a good kind of like you know, pilot, you know, for something, you know. And I think, again, it's easier looking at this retrospectively, because, you know, you've done it. But like I said, I would have probably chosen to do it a little bit faster, to like really decide what to do with it. But, you know, you learn in the process. So yeah, I do think that, you know, there's progress with it. Mm-hmm.
I'm curious to hear what you guys have to say about that as well. But I'd also interject that, like, in terms of maybe wanting to have chosen sooner, maybe circumstances over the last few years have really inhibited the possibility of like free choice in a way.
Yeah, I was thinking a little bit about just circumstances as like a way of approaching this question, just because with Calaboose, when it ended, there were just a few circumstances as to why. More or less, the main reason was we're moving, we're leaving. And so that was just kind of, it felt like a natural conclusion. And other circumstances that we realized after Calaboose had ended was that we were really burnt out from the pace that we were working within. And I think we felt this kind of subconscious pressure. We got swept up in following like a rhythm of exhibiting, and a system that was one that we didn't quite set ourselves, if that makes sense. So yeah, I think the circumstances of how Calaboose ended, I don't think of them as a bad thing, but I also think with project spaces and their duration or maybe their pivot in one direction or another, it's also nice to have a conclusion that brings you a new lesson or helps you understand what you've done later. Yeah.
I think it's also cool to have, for whatever reason, to have sort of finished the narrative of one space and then to go on and do it again, because that's actually kind of rare. I think a lot of spaces that close, that's, that person or people, that's like, okay, well, we did that, but now we're just going to continue, with our own personal art practice or with whatever else.
Yeah, absolutely. I also, it really helped me thinking through Calaboose and, this burnout that we experienced, right, when I was starting my graduate degree from it, really helped me, gave me permission to think about slowing down the program with Joys and centering exhibitions and ways of working with artists around sustainability and thinking through the economy of time and labor that we all kind of can work within and what the capacity is there. I think that's a new awareness that I have with this new project, for sure.
What was the question? Sorry, or generally what's...
How did we get to there?
If it has to
Oh,
go
yeah, if it
somewhere.
has to become something else, yeah.
Yeah. I don't know. I mean, you can close it or whatever. You can end it. Like that's what you're saying too. And I think inevitably things do change. So, and there's external forces and whatnot, But it's interesting because there's a work that in the booth that I have presenting here, and I've been thinking about it all day, but it's copper, and the artist is a deck of cards, and she's kind of handled it in her studio for a year, and now she's done with it. She showed us the cards and put it up, and she's a young artist, and someone made the comment, what's that going to look like in 10 years? Because it's going to oxidize, right? And that's been really appreciated by some people in a sense too. So I don't know, things change.
I also want to say circumstances, right? Circumstantially, for us, the opportunity cost to not do it was very high because the cost is really low to run a garage gallery. So, when you think about, okay, so I want to run an art gallery or a commercial gallery, you say how much is that? if the cost is really high, we can list all the situations for which people have closed this type of projects, and definitely finances is probably in the top 3 or 1. So I think it's also the length of this is really tied to the possibility of continuing to do it. And then if something changes or there's some other ideas of how to make it happen, then that's when also morphs, right? I think it's, for us at least, in our project, is always circumstantial like that. It's really tied to, my other job or something like that.
I think one thing trying to grapple with is I really want to keep how things. I actually really like the way things are now. I don't really want them to change that much. So, but this is how to not grow, but maintain in a sense. And because I'm open 3 days a week, it was really important to be open with regular hours. I'm there on a Thursday. No one comes on Thursday, but sometimes they do, and that's always a good talk, right? But I was away, so at the space, I sit downstairs. It's a really response to a space too. So I sit downstairs, and it's street level. I can talk to people, and they come in, and they expect to see me in a sense, and I can kind of braid these conversations that are happening with visitors, and then visitors come and they meet other visitors, and I can introduce them to each other or pick up. And also the viewers, it's totally discursive that way. So it's the visitors also contribute to the interpretation of the work, and I say, oh, this person was here earlier, this is what they said, this anecdote, and discoveries are made and conversations are had, and it's quite nice. And this is something I absolutely want to maintain. And I was away this summer, and I had to hire someone to look after the gallery, and I feel like I totally missed out on the show, right, in a sense. And so how do I maintain that level of intimacy without having the pressure to grow?
That absolutely resonates with me too. I think maybe that's also something that's a bit special about project spaces is that the level of conversation in the gallery, there may be some sort of comfort that's established in the way, especially people walking into a garage. I have a lot of neighbors, Marx's former neighbors, some of them. One of the changes that we made to the gallery when it became Joy's is that we added an archway. So there's a drywall coming out from the garage door, and then there's an archway. So
Seen the pictures, it looks really nice.
thank you. Yeah, so it always initiates a bit of conversation from the people walking through the alleyway or visitors, and then we do, there's kind of a nice exchange, and then there's like a room for greater conversation.
I don't think that's us.
No? It's just a funny story to complement that. I was building that space in Toronto, and a few neighbors walked by, and they were like, what are you doing here? I was like, yeah, like building a little gallery or something like that. And they were like, can you come and do the same for my garage? So can you build some walls? So they interact really well with the space as well. I think that's also one of those things that I think it's very specific of these projects is the community feels very welcome, and like I think it's a very non-threatening type of situation. Should we be running? What's happening?
Is this like a fire alarm, or it's no? Okay.
Okay. So yeah, I think it's that possibility of it's very easy to approach, right? And the conversations you're mentioning is like, it's super rich, and you hope to with whatever next thing, and if the space morphs, that's something that we in our space want to always create the space for that.
I think what you're all speaking to is that like the kind of spaces that you guys have and have had are like next to the artist studio. They're like the most personal way of experiencing art, I think, that involves the most face time. I'm curious to hear a bit more, following on what Danica was saying about having gone through the experience of running a space once and then sort of bringing lessons from that to the way you want to do it the second time, sort of like procedurally. I also wonder if there's any, you and Eli were both working in like duo partnerships, and now you're both doing it solo, which in a way seems like it would be more work, but I suppose you have more, you make all the decisions now, so. But yeah, I'm just curious to hear more about, what decisions have you made based on the experience you had of doing it the first time?
I'll take it. Yeah, so I think that it's interesting you mentioned the studio. It's actually something I say to people about art fairs all the time, because I've heard people like, oh, I hate art fairs, I don't go there. But I've always liked them because I feel like it's the most abstracted version of like from the artist studio. So it's almost like objective. You can just look at it and you see a lot of stuff. So it's interesting. But the studio is related because I looked at, when I had Vidange with Daphne, we had it for free, right? For 5 years, with this patronage, with this, well, it's not patronage in a traditional way. This guy just left us the keys, right? I didn't have to pay rent, so this was really great. So that's been one of the challenges for sure. But when I saw the space, I asked like my artist friends were the first people I went to say, do you think this space is interesting? And obviously, you ask a bunch of artists to start a gallery, they're going to say yes. But looking at them, like the rent for me is comparable to what an artist pays for a studio. It's more senior artists, they pay that and more. And actually having gone to Toronto and coming back to Montreal, I was like, okay, if I want to do this is the only place I can do it. So I felt I had an obligation in a sense. But so I always saw that as like sort of reciprocation of the investment that artists are making in their studios. So yeah. And the collaboration part was the other kind of question, right?
Yeah. I was curious about how it's different to do it solo rather than a collaboration, but also just sort of like what procedures you chose to do based on your experience from before.
Okay.
So there was something that we thought about that when we moved to Toronto. So the space in Montreal was very raw. It was like not too many. We didn't build walls or anything, just one little wall at the front to have an extra wall to show, and then one wall was just concrete, and the other very ugly wood. That's all. So when we moved to Toronto, we said, let's try to make this place more like cleaner, and a little bit more of a gallery look. And we did that, so it looked a lot cleaner and all of that. But what we felt, and I'm not sure if this is your experience, but it's hard to get out of the box of what people consider DIY. And I'm not always sure that is beneficial for a project. Call it gallery, call it whatever. I'm not sure. I mean, sometimes it's really, you have to explain a lot. And again, like those questions about what you want. So I think, that was one of the considerations we had moving to Toronto with the space, which, proved to be a little bit challenging to change that perspective of what DIY means. Mm-hmm. So still discovering that.
I think for me, well, the first thing I was reflecting on in your question was that I am doing it alone now, but in a way, it's also still kind of a negotiation with another person, because the space, after we took over the lease, we also built a wall through the middle and put an artist studio in the back. So there's an artist who's pretty much actively practicing in the space on the other side of a wall. Sometimes there's hammers happening during the open hours and whatnot. So that's not so much a lesson from closing one space, but it's a really nice way of beginning again. And again, it keeps the costs low. Also for a studio, it's pretty affordable, and that's been really valuable just to have this kind of activity ongoing throughout that isn't only focused on the exhibition. It's like there's also a charged kind of environment in a positive sense. I think normally just the creation is happening just on the other side of a wall or something like that. It's nice to also bring that into conversation, because I think the program at Joyce is also maybe interested in practice and not necessarily always an end result, but the process of figuring it out and learning the lessons along the way.
And that definitely connects to what we were just talking about in terms of like the proximity of this kind of space to the artist studio. I mean, for you, it's even more literal. Mm-hmm. I think we could also open it up to a larger sort of perspective as well in terms of what the landscape looks like for smaller gallery spaces now, especially in the wake of the pandemic. And in the conversations we were starting to have before this panel, a thing that really struck me was, I was thinking like, for sure, looking at these questions after the pandemic must have changed things a lot. But in a lot of ways, for small galleries who are already running on a shoestring budget, for sure there was challenges, like Marx was talking about in setting up in Toronto when you could only have like by appointment viewings. But in general, I think that like what's going on in small gallery type spaces hasn't actually been affected that much by the pandemic. And I'm really curious to hear sort of your perspective about whether that's the case or not.
I've seen some friends like abroad be able to do great things, like just be so light, like they can fold it, move to another city and reopen, right? So no, I totally agree with you. There's like total, well, and it was that when I said that ambiguity was useful. Also, I'm trying to remember back. Such a weird time, like trying to think back to then, but there was a moment here when artist-run centers were closed because from a government mandate, but commercial businesses could be open. So when I had to put on my I'm a business hat. And all of a sudden, I could serve a public, So that was really useful. So it was like that kind of agility was like nice. Yeah.
Toronto's filled with a lot of. I'm speaking now from the Toronto new environment that Joyce is finding itself in, but there's a lot of really interesting different projects, a lot of different models that I've found there. Some with parallels to Montreal and a few garage galleries in Toronto as well, of course. But it's been great to get to know the community there. There seems to be a real investment on doing things together. I think even tomorrow night there's going to be a roundtable that's put on by two spaces, Pumice Raft and Hearth Garage. Focusing on how to do it together, DIT. I think is what they're calling it. Yeah, so it's exciting to see that kind of organization coming from different spaces that have been run, some that do define themselves as nonprofits even, or just artist collectives, or commercial things. There's a nice kind of exchange between them all that I think is really generous, and yeah, there's fewer barriers in that sense, it seems like, especially maybe after the pandemic where people were pretty intensely in lockdown for so long. I think it's just, it's essential to revitalize what was there before and what will be in the future.
It does feel like there's sort of a sense of, not that the pandemic has gone away, but I do feel like there's a sense of rebuilding happening, that like after sort of a fallow period, things are starting to really happen again in a way. I don't know if you guys feel that.
I thought I would be a lot more anxious about seeing people like this, but no, it's been actually pretty easy here. So I think it's a little bit of that feeling of like trying to get back to what we knew in terms of having people over for shows, doing all of that. Yeah, so it's like a post-pandemic type of feeling right now. And when we were thinking about the new space, which will open in November here in Montreal, that was a consideration as well. It's like maybe we'll have to continue to wear masks and all of that. Now it's probably a little bit different in terms of the expectation. We'll see what happens in the fall, but yeah, it's always a consideration in terms of the space, and yeah.
I think it impacted the programming in a sense for me that way, that I was kind of like, I wanted to really, actually, the first show that happened at the space, kind of like, well, I was thinking about taking it as an artist that I've worked with before at Vidange, Abbas Akavin, that lives in Montreal, and he's like, we're quite close. And we go through a lot of walks in the pandemic, and he was asked to do a project, and it was responding by this organization called Proto Cinema, which is based in Istanbul in New York. And I thought this was really exciting what they were doing. What they did is they reached out to artists in 5 different cities around the world, I think it was 5, and wanted them to produce work where they lived in their neighborhoods. And then this was kind of like a group show or like a satellite of a program of 5 solo projects. And so he needed to produce something in Montreal, and he wanted me to help him make it happen. And I was also planning on opening the space. And so I was like, oh, this is how exciting. So to rethink this problem of local and global, we're all on our phones. Like, wait, what? That was one show that Proto Cinema did, but it was like, so it was international, but also so local at the same time. So that was really inspiring for me. And I kind of ran with that afterwards. I'm like, okay, for the next, until this lease cycle, which I've just ended, so that's another like decision time moment, I'm just going to program local shows, so and it's like resolutely local. That's the idea.
Yeah, to that point, when we were in Toronto, it was the first time we planned a show with an artist from New York City, and the shipping cost me probably what I pay for a year, a rent. So yeah, I said, yeah, maybe not this. Maybe not this.
All right, well, I think we're like maybe starting to look at wrapping up here. And one of the things that I wanted to ask you guys about that I think I kind of already maybe know the answer to, I was going to ask you sort of, so what do you see as the future for the space? And I think that what all of you have already said to a certain extent is like, doing it is how we find out. But would you say anything other than that?
In terms of, I have this really interesting program. I'm excited to I feel like it was also really important to establish, coming from the garage context too, is make something that looks like an art gallery, in a really legible way, so people will come in and see it that way. And then if I can build that, then I can detour from it. So I kind of want to do that. Talking to someone really exciting, a collaborator I've had for many years, and he might turn it into a bookstore next year, but as an exhibition, and then I can go do something else. Or I want to start doing, and that's part of the name too, I want that to be like a headquarters in a sense, and then I can do site-specific projects in the city. So curatorially, that's what I want to do, but more and more like things like this become interesting and inevitable, like the art fair become kind of how that can happen in a sense. So I don't know, it's still going to be a juggle, I think, for a while. Yeah.
Yeah, I guess for me, I'm really happy with Joy's right now, but it is a really new project. So I am really just excited to continue developing the program and the tone and see where it goes. I'm really excited for the upcoming projects and the different programs. And I think, yeah, that's in the future. I want to feel kind of like how I feel right now, but with maybe a few more shows behind me or still with me, maybe with new lessons from that. Yeah, I think one thing after all of these lockdowns, it was such a big impact on so many of us. It was really like a mass grieving time, and seeing people come back into the space and just being able to really engage with, you know, small group show or artists in a small environment, it's like really the best. So more.
I think that when you talk about that energy.
Yeah.
That's really what it's great about those projects too. It's like you're really like in it, like, you know, it's like it's you, everything is you. So it's like it's really great. But going back to the actual new place and all of that, I mean, it's very basic. But like I've been talking with many people, like Eli said this weekend, about, you know, the new space, and I just realized that I'm really excited about heating and a bathroom. So it's that basic, but it really, I mean, it really becomes that, you know, when you're running a space, you know, that is so precarious. So
That's when you know you've made it.
what's that?
That's when you know you've made it.
Exactly. Yeah, you have bathroom, great, you know. So no, but yeah, it just allows for, you know, when we're running the projects in the garages, you know, like you're limited also. At least we limited ourselves to like the summer, fall season, right? And so it was pretty rough in terms of like the turnaround in a week of like, you know, bringing in work. And so it allows for better or a little bit like an easier planning and like perhaps more time to like actually fill a show and like, you know, think about what else can we do through the year. And so that's a new kind of opportunity that is opening up.
Awesome. All right, well, do you guys have anything else you want to get to?
Yeah, there's definitely a lot of vulnerability to running a space in a garage. You're very vulnerable to the elements and to your lack of resources. I mean, it was a bonus from going from Calaboose because there's at least running water at this new space. So for me, it's an upgrade.
Yeah, Calaboose was like a shed, right? Like, was that what we?
Carriage house.
Carriage house. Nice. I mean, that sounds very swanky, actually, but.
We had a wood stove.
Right. Yeah, totally. All right. Well, should we open it up to questions or? Okay. Yeah. Any questions? I think if you do have questions, you have to go to the back, or maybe one of us can pass you one of our floating mics. Go to the back.
Everybody's tired.
It's the end of the fair, basically. So.
I can ask a question about how you two have found the fair, because it's, you know, I mean, Marx, you did the fair a couple years ago, but it's probably been different after the pandemic. So.
Yeah, the first time we did it was 2019 when we had some similar conversation with. That's actually interesting to perhaps revisit. The conversation was with Pange and Franz Kaka, right? They were on the verge of changing, and I think that's very fitting to mention that, you know, now they're like galleries and stuff. So, you know, it's I guess a model. Yeah, back then was just a very small project space, which you know, when you are in that kind of mentality of the independent project and all of that, you're usually thinking curatorially most of the time. And a fair, sometimes, you know, it's a little bit of a different approach. And I think, you know, that time we learned a lot. And so this time we try to do it a little bit more fitting. And yeah, I think those are the things that you learn with experience of doing it. So this time we've been having a lot more you know, engagement. And yeah, we're glad to be doing it. I don't know your experience, Eli.
Yeah, it's been good. I mean, I've learned a lot of things. It's been really, I really like where I landed on the floor plan. That was really nice. I'm actually around a lot of older gallerists or more senior gallerists that I have relationships with. They've been really supportive. Like Pierre Francois, who's like right across from me, and I live in his neighborhood, so I kind of really admire his practice of running the gallery, and he's been very encouraging. MKG's next to me, and they're showing Alan Belcher. It's the next artist I show. So it's been nice to like kind of be encouraged by these people as well. And I really wanted to like present, how do I like present the gallery at the fair? So the artists and I all worked, this was like actually more work than running the space for the summer. It was like double, you know, so.
Well, you don't do group shows usually, so.
Yeah, and I don't do group shows, so this was that. And I've met a lot of the goals that I set, but it's been amazing meeting people who just live super close by. And yeah, able to, like, I think part of this maybe impulse to go more commercial if it's there is, for me, is a logical line from curating, like thinking about like being concerned about where the art is made and shown, to now I'm kind of like, okay, well, where does it go, right? So the one of the works that I placed this weekend, it went to the right place, and like to a couple that really like loves it, and it's going to be very good for the artist, and like I feel like I did my job, so I'm like really happy about that. Yeah, so it's been good on that level. Yeah.
I keep saying to some patrons here that the impact that they will have with some of the pieces they have acquired for emerging artists, it's, you know, you cannot really put a real, you know, number on it. Like it's really important versus perhaps like a more established artist that is going to be just another sale. Like for these people, really become 3, 4, 5 months of rent of their studios, right? So it's very important. So I think, you know, it's really this is why we're doing this now, to really have that opportunity to support in this way artists, which has always been about that. But yeah, it's not as simple though. All of this may sound like, oh yeah, no, you go to a fair and you sell. Well, not quite. So, so yeah, it's a process.
Hi. So I just wanted to kind of return to something that was talked about earlier in the conversation, which was kind of about zero growth and maintenance, rather than trying to expand, you know, and do tons of work and exhaust oneself. And I was just wanting to ask the panel, as you guys are clearly moving up through the gallery world and your careers are progressing, are you continuing to think about that? If so, how are you bringing it into what you're doing now, and how might you think about it in the future as you, I would guess, continue to move up through the gallery world?
Well, yeah, I guess I answered that question a little bit thinking through just maintaining what I'm building right now and keeping it consistent and finding the voice of Joyce even more through the programming and the writing. So I think, yeah, one aspect of that will be also setting boundaries that are firm, because it's also very true that when it's just you, there's no one to tell you to take a break. And so when you have other things and you do have this, you know, another job maybe, or just other commitments, other responsibilities, or even just needing downtime, I think finding boundaries and learning to respect your own limits is important. And maybe not overcommitting, because I think when you do that, there's also the risk of doing a disservice to others. So just understanding your limits and communicating those, and hoping that others will respond to that positively and want to collaborate within that, understanding that their boundaries and limits are super, like, absolutely respected above anything that the project would want to take forward first.
I agree with all of that, especially the limits. And I think learning them and really being aware of that is very important. Because, yeah, I mean, it's very exciting to think about a bunch of things in the project and like the gallery and all of that, but it's really, you know, first, like your responsibility to the work, to the artist is very, very important. And so when you think about expanding or doing something like that, you need to consider all the impacts or the implications of that with the people that you normally work with, right? Also, to be honest, also, I don't know what your situations are, but like in my case, my family too. So it's like, need to really think about that and think about, what are the possibilities to do any, make any decisions for the project.
I mean, all of you guys have other commitments in your life besides this project that you run. There's a lot to balance there. I think that it's an interesting question. Like, how does one avoid the sort of impulse to just sort of like exploit yourself when there's so much pressure to, to be entrepreneurial in a way? I don't know, I think you guys have good answers for that.
Just look to the artists, I guess. I mean, if keep artists around you and having these conversations with them, and I think they have the answers. So they're my role models.
The person is asking, do you think your activities will change the established practices, so commercial versus non-traditional?
I think that's the problem in a sense. Well, something I would be tapping on what Saelan talked about like, what like sort of this culture of entrepreneurialization and kind of like self-exploitation in a sense. It's just like this is kind of what I meant a long time ago, but it's like, if we prove that we can do this for cheaper, like they can be misunderstood in a really dangerous way. So, yeah, like it is work. I don't know. Yeah, it's weird.
I mean, I think
hopefully though too in positive directions. But
one thing we didn't really talk about is, we talked a little bit about like how and to what extent the pandemic has affected procedures for small galleries. And in the back of my mind, I was thinking that in a lot of ways, it's affected bigger institutions more. Like there's been a lot of turmoil going on in big institutions over the last few years for pandemic reasons and for political reasons. And I think that there hasn't been as much of that same fallout in smaller spaces. And part of that is just because there isn't the same level of hierarchical structure going on already. There isn't the same level of exploitation. But I think it is interesting to consider smaller spaces in relation to that climate and context. And I'd be curious about whether you guys think that you're bringing something to the table in terms of how a space can operate that other spaces could learn from.
I think, when you compare these spaces to more established spaces or institutions, it allows for trying things out in terms of different ways of working. Recently, when we decided to potentially start representing artists and all of that, it was interesting to have these conversations with the people that we normally work with, because it was not always what it was wanted. And that was really important for us as a space to learn, because that's something that allows you to, work better with artists in the end. It's like, what is the climate like? What is it needed? How can we actually create a structure that benefits everybody, not just potentially a gallery, right? So yeah, I think it, there's one way of doing things and culture becomes one, but I don't see why not to question it.
Yeah, one thing that I noticed while I was working for a museum during the pandemic that had to open and close several times, and also consider its programming, look through what was already kind of ready to come out and what might be set up for the future years, was that there was very little capacity for the museum to seek out feedback from its audience. And that's an advantage that you have as a project space, is you usually, if you're doing your own hours, you're directly speaking to your audience all the time and getting feedback in real time. It's something that's very special, and it's very difficult for like a larger institution to seek out, especially during maybe a lockdown or a closure. I think that those things were harder to program, especially as things moved online. It was the difference between, putting something out there and just kind of, does it feel like screaming into the void, or are you able to get a response, and how does that happen? Because I think the timeline that the pandemic demanded for that type of programming was, I don't want to say impossible, but it was a huge challenge, I think, for the amount of people that are involved in working with larger institutions.
But maybe the point of the politics and all of that, I don't know, maybe these projects are too small for scrutiny. Really?
Yeah, I mean, honestly, I do think it's a factor. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I think, it really also, it's factor of how many people are looking into the stuff, right?
Yeah.
And yeah, I mean, I think as it grows, you have to be potentially more careful with that.
Yeah.
But when you start it, probably people also feel like they have support so that it doesn't just stop happening, right? Yeah, so yeah, I think it's a factor of that.
I did a studio visit yesterday, and I was talking about the scale of Joy's and its model. And one thing that I liked that and one of the artists said to me was that you can kind of define your own failures, which is nice because I found it to be true. You know, you can, I mean, if you're very hard on yourself and you're running a space by yourself, that can be agonizing. But if you can also interpret the feedback as a lesson or, you know, a new challenge for the future, it can be very rewarding.
All right. Well, thanks so much for coming out, everybody.